Hello, I'm Joe. For those of you who have returned to listen again, welcome back. I've been tinkering with the audio and background sound, and it's getting better. Thank you for your patience and support in me finding what sounds the best for your listening pleasure. Also, if you have any experiences or stories that you would like to share, feel free to send them to the email in the description. Alright, let's get on with the show. My encounter is very brief, but I hope it's interesting to you nonetheless. I was deer hunting, and I kept hearing something rustling around my stand, kind of like in a circling motion. I kept getting glimpses of something through the scrubs. I thought it was a hog or something like that. Then I got a horrible stench, like a skunk mixed with a wet dog and something dead. What I saw next, I would never forget. This thing was like the biggest dog I have ever seen. It stepped out of the bushes. It was on all fours and quickly went back in. I saw this thing for only a split second, but I know what I saw. Honestly, I wasted no time after this. I was pretty sure I had just seen the Michigan dogman that I'd heard about all my life. I packed up everything I could as quickly as I could, and I hauled ass out of there. I don't hunt anymore, and I'm constantly aware of things around me since we live in the woods. Thank you for sharing my story. I know it was super brief, and I only saw it for a second, but I'm positive it was the dogman. There's no way any natural wolf or dog could be that big, even on all fours. I live in a somewhat medium-sized town with a mix of cities and backwood areas nearby. The bus stop I use has a good mix. It has buildings nearby while also having entry to the nearby surrounding woods. One morning, I was waiting for the bus when I realized it was late. That morning, I got annoyed and decided since I was bored, I would go into this little walkway/trail that was nearby. Not all the way, just enough to where I could be secluded by the trees. After a while of checking my phone, I heard the bus stop at the stop a little way down from mine. I headed back to the stop, and when I got there, I got a fight-or-flight response that was very intense, like if a weapon had just been shot off. I turned around to see this crouching creature coming out of the secluded area. It was just pitch black, arms about the size of half its body. Its head looked like an eraser. The most terrifying part of it was the creature's size. It was easily the size of a telephone or lamp pole. It towered over me and everything around it. Its hands were large, and its fingers were thick and were about the size of half my arm. I don't know if I should run because I knew this thing would catch me in a matter of steps. Some time passed while it climbed out of the walkway and stood looking at me. Then the bus pulled up and opened its doors. I looked at the bus and back at the creature, but it was gone, just vanished. I looked at the bus driver, and his face was normal, so I assumed he hadn't seen anything. I got on the bus and suddenly cried for a few minutes. I don't know if this is correlated or if it's just my brain, but that night, I had a dream where the exact same thing happened, except the bus didn't show up. And as you can imagine, things didn't go all that well for me for the rest of the dream. My friends called it the Lion Man, but I don't care about naming it. I've been back to the bus stop over the course of a week, and every time I was watching the trees in the walkway, but never saw it. I'm still scared of going back to that bus stop.
Here's a story that my daughter shared with me. So what happened was my daughter, who was still at home in her first year of cosmetology school, and a friend had gone to Wichita to a show. On their way home, driving on a country road to cut over from a highway to our house, they came around a bend in the road. Their headlights swept across the road in front of them, and standing by the side of the road, near the guardrail and the concrete bridge, was what they described as a werewolf. The girls were so frightened when telling me that it took them a bit to calm down enough to get some sense out of them. The road is a north-south road, and the sighting was a quarter mile from town. The bridge is just a small one that goes over a runoff creek, and my guess is the dogman was too big to go under it but had to go over it instead, and was coming up the draw from the creek bottom. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. My daughter's car was small, a Chevy Cavalier, and she said the lights didn't reach this thing's face, so they didn't get any eye shine, but it was huge. It was black, and the height and width of a cow on all fours. All they could focus on was the muzzle and the huge razor-sharp teeth when it peeled its lips back and snarled at them. She said it could have reached out and touched their car if it wanted to, but it didn't. She screamed as she stomped on the gas pedal. They were both looking behind once they got into town because they were so worried that I was chasing them. She wiped her eyes and said, "I think we saw a freaking werewolf, Mom." I seriously remember the hair standing up on the back of my neck. After asking her if she was sure she hadn't seen a Sasquatch, and her saying, "Mom, you don't understand. It was the biggest wolf I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't a Bigfoot, it was a werewolf." I just had no idea what they saw, but they were very scared, and I told her to never drive on that road at night again. I felt kind of hopeless. Flash forward 10 years and I hear a story on YouTube on your YouTube channel called Dogman, and the light bulb came on. I was like, oh my god, this is what those two girls saw here in Kansas of all places. I sent her the YouTube video, and she was pretty shaken up but relieved to know that this was a real thing. If it helps to know, this area is about 2, maybe 3 miles from a river which is east of the road they saw it on. They didn't get a good look at it as it was pretty dark outside that night. All they saw was the front shoulders, chest, and apparently teeth. Those were the details they gave me.
I probably sound crazy to you, but I have seen this thing twice within a 3-month span. After that, I moved from that area. Thank God I was 16 and had just got my license, and my brother sold me a 1989 T-top Camaro. I was told about an auction house out in the middle of nowhere. I was asking around because I was bored and needed people to hang out with. It turned out to be 1 mile behind where I lived, which was convenient. If you want, I could send you the Google Map picture of the roads I was on at the time, the 2 encounters. You will see that they are only about a 3-mile radius and have woodland on either side of them. So I went to the auction and made friends with a guy named Bob. For the purposes of this video, he asked me for a ride home because he was trying to hook up with the auctioneer's daughter. He let his ride go without him, so we were staying over late because he was trying to hook up with a girl, like I said. After the auction had closed, it was about 11 p.m. and pitch black when we finally left. As I was going down the road, the auction was on. We came to a curb that was closer to the wood line than the straightaway. As we started to go to the curb, Bob screamed to stop, so I slammed on the brakes thinking he was crazy. Then he said under his voice, "Look to the right." I did spot a pair of glowing red eyes about 2 feet off the ground. I said, "Is that a coyote?" Bob said the eye shine reminded him of one, but coyotes were orange, not red. I said, "Well, do you have a weapon? Do you have a coyote permit?" He said yes to both. It is not uncommon for people to carry concealed guns in the countryside of Kentucky. He pulled out a .22 long revolver from his coat, then stood up out of the T-top. He draws his weapon and shoots, firing all 6 rounds into the spot with the eyes. He then replies to go grab our supper, jokingly. I bent over to get a flashlight out of the glove box. As I bent over, I saw the eyes again, but they had gone from 2 feet to 8 feet tall. At that point, I smash on the gas pedal while still bent over towards the glove box, and Bob screams, "What the hell, man?" I replied, "We will come back and get it in the morning." We went back to find no blood and no dead animal. What we did find was one large dog-looking footprint and limbs broken off at about 7 feet tall. It's insane to think what could have been there. I've never told anyone about this afterward, but I know it was a dogman. This is a true story my grandma experienced. Truth be told, during her life before she and my mom moved out of their home village, she experienced quite a few strange things, and this is one of them. Before I go deeper into this story, I need to let you know that my grandmother lived in a small village and was working as a postwoman. Her job allowed her to talk and meet with old people at the time, who told us some spooky, supposedly true stories about the area or people living there. Being a postwoman also meant that she had to travel quite a bit to deliver mail, as there were fields, forests, and some people lived further from the center of the village. During spring, summer, and autumn, when the roads were good, She used her bike, and when it was winter or very muddy, she took her horse with a wagon. This happened in the winter or late water because she took her horse. As I mentioned, some people lived quite further out, so she had to cross a forest in order to deliver some mail. As she was going back, she took another route in that forest, and somehow she ended up going in circles. She recalled that old folks told her a story that once there was a mansion, and it sank into the ground instantly during a wedding feast, and only a priest managed to escape. Everyone else went into the ground with the house. Supposedly years passed, and the forest took over the place, but somehow it remained sinister. My grandma figured that it must be the same cursed place she heard, that whoever walks into its territory ends up going in circles. She spent a good half of the day trying to get out of it, but no matter where she turned, she ended up going in circles. Round and round she went, not being able to escape. Then, as she got tired, she gave up and spoke to her horse. She asked him to take her home and release the reins, thus giving her horse total control and freedom. The horse took them home. Turns out, she'd spent a good 5 to 8 hours because it was already night when she returned. To this day, she can't explain what happened. That accident occurred after years of work, and she was born in that village, so she knew the place pretty well.
It was 2005, and I was 19 years old at the time. I grew up knowing about the dogman and really didn't believe it was real. I played in the woods a lot as a young kid. One warm fall day, my boyfriend, myself, and 2 friends went out to see my grandmother at her family cabin. When we got there, my 2 younger cousins were there as well. They wanted to walk down to the river, so we all went, leaving my grandmother to have some alone time without the 2 young boys. As we walked up the hill, the boys wanted to race the 2 older boys. So when we got to the start of the trail going to the river, all 4 boys lined up, and I yelled, "Ready, set, go!" As the boys ran down, us girls were yelling, "Run faster! Who's going to win?" Just then, a huge buck came out of nowhere. My boyfriend grabs one of the young boys out of the way. I saw the buck and looked to see where it had come from. My family is very much into hunting, and we hadn't been quiet by any means. This deer should have heard us long before we were close and ran off before we saw it. As I looked to where it came from, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like my brain and I were fighting to make sense of what was happening. A huge black dog standing on 2 legs was standing there. It looked like a man with the dog's head. It wasn't looking at me, it was looking at my boyfriend. It looked to be out of breath like it had been running. I looked at my boyfriend and he was looking at it as well, but the others were watching the deer when I looked back. I saw it run back down the hill. I ran up to my boyfriend. His eyes were wide and he looked at me. All I could say was, "Yes, I saw it too." The young boy and our 2 friends didn't see it, so we went to the river and back to the cabin. We left and my boyfriend and I really didn't talk about it. Later that night, some more of our friends came over and all the boys wanted to play Guitar Hero. As they played, I took a picture of them. Now my boyfriend and I live in a very old farmhouse. The windows are floor-to-ceiling windows. They are about 6, maybe 7 feet tall. In one of the pictures, you can see my dog laying on the floor, asleep, and all the boys are in my picture. Well, it was about a week or 2 after the picture was taken, and my friend wanted to see all the pictures I took that night, so I put them on my laptop. She was looking at them and she yelled for me and my boyfriend to come. She zooms in, and the top corner of the window was a dog's face with its mouth open. We couldn't believe it. After she left, my boyfriend and I sat there looking at it. Had this thing followed us or had it found us somehow? Was it mad about the deer? It was terrifying.
My name is Glenn. I live in southern Louisiana, all the way south. I won't give an exact location, but it's about an hour from Baton Rouge and 2 hours from New Orleans. I have lived here all my life. I grew up hunting and fishing ever since I could hold a gun and a fishing pole. I thought I had seen every animal that they had to see in the woods. I never believed in dogman or Bigfoot. Well, now my friends, I can tell you with 100% certainty they exist where I live. I own 58 acres of about half hardwoods and swampland. Well, my encounter happened around 2 years ago. See, where I live, it's in the woods, in a trailer behind my mother's house. I have no driveway. It's a dirt path that runs through a small section of woods that separates my house from my mom's. Well, anyways, it was 4 a.m. when I got up to go to work. I got dressed and was getting ready to leave. I went to let my dog out to do his business. He is a 145-pound pit bull named Bear, and he was acting very weird. He would just stand in the doorway, ingrained whine. He would not go out, and when I went to leave, he kept trying to get between me and the door. So, I just pushed past him and started walking up to my truck. It was still dark, and all I had was a keychain light, and it was not bright, barely enough to light up the path. As I started my way up to the path, something just didn't feel right. It's hard to explain. It's like the air was heavy, if that makes any sense at all, and all I could smell was this musky piss smell. I kept walking and kept going forward, trying to brush it off. It's about 175 yards away from my house at this point, where my truck is parked, about halfway through the wooded parts. I could hear something walking behind me, crunching leaves every time. I would stop. I would hear it abruptly stop as well. I would shine my light, and I could see these two greenish-yellow eyes about 4.5 feet off the ground. The hair instantly stood up on the back of my neck, and this wave of fear came over me. Like I said, I have hunted and killed everything around here. I don't by any means scare easily. I have even jumped in the water on a 7-foot gator's back, slit his throat, but this thing scared the hell out of me. I can't explain why at this time, but all I could see was its eyes, and didn't know what it was. I just knew it was big, and somehow projected fear. I was so scared, I slowly just realized I couldn't move at all. As I'm standing there, shining my really crappy light on this thing, it starts to slowly come my way. It took everything I had to get my legs to work. I turned around and ran as fast as I could. As I am running, I can hear this thing behind me, its feet making a loud pounding sound. I know this sounds crazy, but I could feel this thing's hot, rancid, meat-smelling breath on the back of my neck. I don't know how, but I made it out of the wooded part of the path. I had about 45 yards to go to get to my truck. I'm fumbling to get my keys out of my pocket. Thank God the car was unlocked. I jumped in my pickup truck and immediately hit the lights. It was parked facing the woods. When I lit up the path, I just about peed my pants. If I would have needed, I would have. It was a creature out of my worst nightmare. Just thinking about this thing is giving me chills as I'm writing this. This thing was at least 7 to 8 feet tall. It kind of looks like a werewolf from the movie Silver Bullet. It just stood there on his back legs, looking at me. This thing was huge. It would make any heavyweight bodybuilder jealous. I grabbed my phone to try to get a picture, but by the time I got my phone unlocked and on the camera, it had backed up into the woods. I snapped a picture, but all you could see was a blurry black shape. I called my mom and told her to make sure the doors were locked, and she had the shotgun by her side. I couldn't tell her what I had really seen. I said I saw someone in black creeping around. I've only told this to one other person, and they didn't know it, but I know they think I'm crazy. So I just keep my mouth shut about it. Now I know this beast could have caught me, but it didn't. I think it just wanted to scare the crap out of me or something. I think it somehow feeds off the fear it causes. It's been 2 years since this happened, and I haven't seen it since. But a few times I've heard scratching on the side of my trailer. Sometimes I hear the coyotes howling and yipping. Then I hear this deep wolf-sounding howl, and the coyotes shut up. There are no wolves in Louisiana, so I know what it is. I'm just starting to go into the woods again, but never before daylight and never without a rifle or a shotgun, or at least a pistol. Anyone who wants to seek these creatures out, I beg that you don't. It could ruin your life. Be safe in the woods, and God bless. So, my friend, my sister and I were exploring this abandoned mill near my house the other night. We climbed in the first house and were climbing up the stairs to the second floor when we heard a noise. My sister was at the top of the steps, and I was somewhere near the middle. I pointed my flashlight around the middle of the room, and we all saw this big gray, furry creature that looked like it was hunched over. I saw a tail, and my sister says she saw big, meaty shoulders, humanoid hands, and glowing yellow eyes. We quickly realized that whatever this thing was, it was probably not too happy with us being in its territory. We swiftly got the heck out of there. What really sent chills down our spine was the fact that when we walked around the house, we noticed that there was a ladder going up to the second story. In order to get into the house, we had to step up on this barrel and climb up onto a metal pole to hoist ourselves up to the entrance, which was about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. That means whatever this creature was probably could not have gotten up there the way we did. If it used a ladder, it was definitely something humanoid. It messed up. Once we got back home, we did our research about possible animals that could have been living in Virginia. There were not many animals that resembled the creature that we saw. It was too big to be a fox or a cat, had different fur than a wolf, and had a tail, so it couldn't be a bear. This led us to do more research into cryptids. We came across the stories of dogman, and when we looked at the pictures that came up, it seemed to resemble what we saw. I read some stories about dogman and stumbled across the Swamp Dwellers channel. From these stories, it seemed that people who saw it usually formed obsessions over it, and my sister, being the only one that saw its eyes, was ranting and raving about how curious they looked. She kept saying she wanted to go back and see it again. My sister drew a sketch of what she saw and was drawing some tarot readings after we got home. She had her cards stacked on her sketchbook, and a bug crawled into it and started going crazy, running around into it. It stepped in the middle of the deck, and then it stopped moving. My friend picked up the top card, and it was the Wolfman card. We're thinking of going back to investigate soon, but I just wanted to tell the story to let you know that there may be dogmen in Virginia. My father-in-law hunts on my family's lake house. He had been going to summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee since he was a little kid, every summer, same camp as him and his brothers. His whole life in the 80s, the camp closed down and then sold off as lots on the island where the camp was to form a campus. My father-in-law bought one of the properties and started bringing his own children there every summer. Fast forward 30 years, I marry his eldest daughter and start going up to the lake every weekend with my wife and her family. Unfortunately, after a few years of this, my father-in-law succumbed to leukemia and was no longer with us. Also, everyone thought that every summer since he had passed, I've had at least one unexplainable incident happen to me up at the lake house. It usually happens the weekends we open up our lake house for the summer, or the weekend that we close down for the winter. There is often an incident when we have a lot of family come for visits too. The first time I noticed something was amiss was the first summer we opened camp after he'd passed away. As I am the eldest male in the family now, it's typically my job to do all the heavy lifting. I was unloading our boatload of supplies on the dock with a little wagon that I used to haul all of my wife's stuff from the boat to the house. They carefully stacked all of our stuff in a pyramid-like shape so that when I pulled the wagon, nothing would wiggle loose and fall off. After 3 trips from the boat to the wagon, I had just one bag left in the boat to grab. As I turned back towards the wagon with the final bag, I froze in my tracks. A brand new rug, still rolled up and in plastic wrap that I had buried in our bags on the wagon so it wouldn't roll off, was now out from under all the stuff I'd piled on top of it, and was leaning at a 45-degree angle on the side of the cart, just sitting up in the air, not anything close to how I'd left it. Right there and in front of me, my blood rang cold. As I pulled the wagon towards our house, I called out to my wife, "Your dad says hello." The following day, when I was alone in my brother-in-law's little shack, I was busy setting up furniture and making beds, getting our camp ready for visitors. Suddenly, an acorn struck me in the back of the head and then tumbled to the ground. I looked up wondering if a rodent or something scurried by and knocked it onto me, but there was nothing but the open pitch of the roof above my head. He said hello again, and I ran out of there. The next summer, we had a little family reunion of sorts, and my wife's cousins and all their kids came to spend the weekend with us at the lake. One afternoon, I was out back behind the house grilling some lunch for everyone. Everyone else was down at the beach or playing in the water. As I walked through the back door, a balled-up Pikachu bathrobe came flying down the stairs and hit me in the face. In a fury, I pulled the robe off my face and stormed up the stairs, intent on giving whoever did this a good talking to. But there was no one. There was no one else in the house but me. Nobody believed me when I told them what happened. The following summer, when my wife started to believe it, for some reason, my wife had been digging around under our cabin where her mom and dad used to stay before we built the main house. She found an old set of wrenches that had sunken down in the dirt under the house, probably after many rainstorms. She was washing the old tools off in the sink, and when I came into the kitchen and scoffed, explaining that you don't use water to wash metal tools, you should use WD-40 or something, she told me I didn't know what I was talking about. To that I responded, "If your father were here, he'd tell you the same thing." To which my wife said, "No, he wouldn't," very confidently. Suddenly, a bar stool that was positioned between my wife and me jumped and moved an inch. It didn't slide across the floor or anything, but it certainly hopped slightly. It was noticeable and made a pretty loud thud. My wife and I were both startled, and I said, "See, I told you your dad agrees." From that day on, she stopped questioning me about my encounters with her father. My father-in-law hunts on my family's lake house. He had been going to summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee since he was a little kid, every summer, same camp as him and his brothers. His whole life in the 80s, the camp closed down and then sold off as lots on the island where the camp was to form a campus. My father-in-law bought one of the properties and started bringing his own children there every summer. Fast forward 30 years, I marry his eldest daughter and start going up to the lake every weekend with my wife and her family. Unfortunately, after a few years of this, my father-in-law succumbed to leukemia and was no longer with us. Also, everyone thought that every summer since he had passed, I've had at least one unexplainable incident happen to me up at the lake house. It usually happens the weekends we open up our lake house for the summer, or the weekend that we close down for the winter. There is often an incident when we have a lot of family come for visits too. The first time I noticed something was amiss was the first summer we opened camp after he'd passed away. As I am the eldest male in the family now, it's typically my job to do all the heavy lifting. I was unloading our boatload of supplies on the dock with a little wagon that I used to haul all of my wife's stuff from the boat to the house. They carefully stacked all of our stuff in a pyramid-like shape so that when I pulled the wagon, nothing would wiggle loose and fall off. After 3 trips from the boat to the wagon, I had just one bag left in the boat to grab. As I turned back towards the wagon with the final bag, I froze in my tracks. A brand new rug, still rolled up and in plastic wrap that I had buried in our bags on the wagon so it wouldn't roll off, was now out from under all the stuff I'd piled on top of it, and was leaning at a 45-degree angle on the side of the cart, just sitting up in the air, not anything close to how I'd left it. Right there and in front of me, my blood rang cold. As I pulled the wagon towards our house, I called out to my wife, "Your dad says hello." The following day, when I was alone in my brother-in-law's little shack, I was busy setting up furniture and making beds, getting our camp ready for visitors. Suddenly, an acorn struck me in the back of the head and then tumbled to the ground. I looked up wondering if a rodent or something scurried by and knocked it onto me, but there was nothing but the open pitch of the roof above my head. He said hello again, and I ran out of there. The next summer, we had a little family reunion of sorts, and my wife's cousins and all their kids came to spend the weekend with us at the lake. One afternoon, I was out back behind the house grilling some lunch for everyone. Everyone else was down at the beach or playing in the water. As I walked through the back door, a balled-up Pikachu bathrobe came flying down the stairs and hit me in the face. In a fury, I pulled the robe off my face and stormed up the stairs, intent on giving whoever did this a good talking to. But there was no one. There was no one else in the house but me. Nobody believed me when I told them what happened. The following summer, when my wife started to believe it, for some reason, My wife had been digging around under our cabin where her mom and dad used to stay before we built the main house. She found an old set of wrenches that had sunken down in the dirt under the house, probably after many rainstorms. She was washing the old tools off in the sink, and when I came into the kitchen and scoffed, explaining that you don't use water to wash metal tools, you should use WD-40 or something, she told me I didn't know what I was talking about. To that I responded, "If your father were here, he'd tell you the same thing." To which my wife said, "No, he wouldn't," very confidently. Suddenly, a bar stool that was positioned between my wife and me jumped and moved an inch. It didn't slide across the floor or anything, but it certainly hopped slightly. It was noticeable and made a pretty loud thud. My wife and I were both startled, and I said, "See, I told you your dad agrees." From that day on, she stopped questioning me about my encounters with her father.